Richard Howard for NASCAR Hall of Fame. Well, your first question after seeing the title, who is or was Richard Howard? And first, I apologize. I do not know if the man's still alive. I tried Google, I tried Wikipedia. I couldn't come up with any details. But Richard Howard was a North Carolina furniture company owner, Howard Furniture. In the 60s into the 70s, before being forced out when Bruton Smith bought back into Charlotte Motor Speedway and took over majority ownership, he was what today would be considered general manager, promoter. I don't know what title he had. That's not important. But Richard Howard's contributions to NASCAR racing are numerous. Number one, his Howard Furniture Company sponsored journeyman independent driver Neil Castles. Number two, his when he took over Charlotte Motor Speedway, and you got to remember, most of the speedways built in the early 60s were in financial trouble. First, with his own money, he helped bail out the Atlanta Speedway. There might not be an Atlanta Speedway. Second, again with his own money, he helped bail out the Charlotte Motor Speedway. Frankly, without Richard Howard, we might not have the showplace, and I've been to both tracks, Atlanta and Charlotte. And without Richard Howard, Charlotte Motor Speedway might not exist today. He actually held a public mortgage burning. Third, or next, in 1971, the factories had all but pulled out at the end of the 70s season. In the 60s was the heyday of NASCAR, factory-backed cars. Up through 1970, all the big names were driving cars financed from the factory. Well, after 1970, Ford pulled all the way out. Chrysler cut back to two cars, Richard Petty and Buddy Baker. Richard Petty full-time, Buddy Baker part-time, both driving out of Petty Enterprises. The factories were gone. Chevrolet had not been in racing since the mid to later 60s, and that was just with Bobby Allison running his independent Chevelle. Matter of fact, he got fired from the Holman and Moody Ford team for running his Chevelle at a race that the Holman Moody Ford team did not run, replaced by David Pearson, who won 2 championships for Holman Moody. In 71, you just had a few cars capable of winning races. Bobby Allison, after starting out in his own Dodge, switched to the Holman Moody Mercury, and Ford's no longer factory back, so he was free to run his own equipment in other races and did run his Dodge some. Richard Petty and Buddy Baker in the Petty Enterprises car, factory back. Bobby Isaac in the K&K Dodge in the Wood Brothers car with both A.J. Foyt and Donnie Allison that year. As it led up to the 1971 World 600 at Charlotte, Richard Howard needed to do something to help attendance, so he thought, let's bring Chevrolet back competitive. Well, when I read what he was going to do, I thought he was crazy. And we got to remember, I'd only been 11 or 12 years old at the time. Most of the Chevrolets were Chevelles. Well, he announced he was going to have Junior Johnson build a Monte Carlo. So he did. Well, I'm thinking Monte Carlos are bigger than Chevelles, are too big. The first generation Monte Carlo was a pretty good sized car. I did not know about the engine setback when stock cars were more stock. They weren't stock then. But the engines in the Monte Carlos actually sat back an inch farther than other cars. In fact, they took that away in 78 when they allowed the other GM brands to run Chevrolet engines. But so Junior Johnson went out and hired Charlie Glotzbach, who promptly put the car on the pole for the 600, led part of the race before crashing out after what I believe was a mechanical failure. So it was off and running. Then a couple races later, Glotzbach, with relief help from Friday Hassler, won the Bristol Summer Race. You got to remember, this was run in the daytime, long before lights at Bristol. Hot, almost everybody there that run the whole race had relief. Very few didn't. And not only did they win the race, no caution flags at Bristol. And that race to this day holds a track record for. So Chevrolet was back in racing in 72. Bobby Allison brought his Coke sponsorship over and won 10 races, lost the championship on some mechanical failures, but petty. And by 72, the factories were all the way out, and then they hired Cale Yarborough, who drove the car up through 80, winning 3 championships. Now, Richard Howard, I believe it was 74, got out of the ownership business, but Richard Hart's other contributions were coming up with ideas, what they called a big chance special. Fans literally voted the driver they wanted in a second Junior Johnson car. One year it was the late Dick Trickle who responded with not only drove the car, brought a sponsor with him, A&W Root Beer, which he had on his short track cars at the time, drove the car to a top 10 finish in Charlotte. But you gotta remember, Richard Hart, he saved 2 racetracks. He also was very instrumental in getting Chevrolet back in racing after they'd been out of racing. Frankly, the only reason, in my opinion, Bobby Allison was running so good in maybe 67, and remember, I just read up on this, I'm not really old enough to remember. NASCAR at that time had a pounds per cubic inch rule. So he was running a small block Chevrolet engine still popular in short track racing today. In fact, there's a story that he went out after blowing an engine, went to a Chevrolet deal and bought a 327 Chevrolet engine, small block, and won the race. But the pounds per cubic inch, the cars weighed so much per cubic inch back then. He was able to run a lighter car, get better fuel mileage than the big blocks they run at the time, the 426s, Hemis, the 427 Fords, the 429s came later, I believe. I could be wrong on that, I'd have to look it up. And if you want to read more on Richard Hart, if you go to Facebook, and this is an open group, so if you're not in, why not if you're watching these videos? NASCAR history until 1972. Pull down on the magnifying glass toward the top under the group photo and type in the name Richard Hart and you will get some stories. But in my opinion, and again disclaimer, this is strictly my opinion, Richard Hart belongs in the NASCAR Hall of Fame as one of the hidden heroes of NASCAR. Saved 2 racetracks, brought Chevrolet back, had some innovative promoter ideas promoting races. Yes, I know he was replaced by Humpy Wheeler, and I like Humpy Wheeler. I didn't at first. Matter of fact, I subscribed to his YouTube channel. I don't always agree with him, but people don't always agree with me either. But like I say, again, I apologize for not knowing if the man is still alive. I've been unable to determine that. But check out on Facebook, NASCAR History until 1972, because you need to use the search button because that site has a lot on it. If I can be off Facebook for 4 or 5 hours, and it'll be 20 plus. So use the search.